Gather close, traveler, for what I share with you are the echoes of our world, the whispers of the planet, its heroes and its tragedies, its battles and its sorrows. These are not merely stories, but the lifeblood of the land itself, carried through the life stream and remembered by those who still listen. Stay with me, and together we shall journey through its history, one legend at a time. And you, traveler, inscribe your mark in the journal. Tell us from which land you hail and how many years had passed when you first heard the tales of Midgar. For your story, too, is part of the great memory. Now, let us walk back through the ages and remember what was long ago. The Last Guardian of Cosmo Canyon, The Legend of Red XIII. In the vast tapestry of worlds beyond our own, where the very essence of life flows like rivers beneath the surface of reality, there exists a tale of profound sorrow and transcendent wisdom. It is the story of one who bore the weight of ancestry upon his shoulders, who walked between the realm of mortals and the eternal dance of the cosmos itself. This is the legend of Nanaki, known to many as Red XIII, the last guardian of Cosmo Canyon and keeper of ancient truths that predate the rise of humanity itself. To understand Nanaki's place in the grand chronicle of the planet's struggle, we must first journey to that sacred place where his story begins. Cosmo Canyon, a sanctuary carved from red stone and amber light, where the very walls seem to pulse with the planet's heartbeat. Here, beneath stars that have witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, stands a settlement unlike any other in the world. It is not merely a town, but a living temple, a place where the boundary between the physical and spiritual grows thin as mountain air. Cosmo Canyon rises from the desert like a vision born of flame and earth, its structures hewn from sandstone that glows with an inner warmth when touched by sunlight. Ancient pathways wind through multiple levels, connecting workshops where scholars pursue the mysteries of the planet's essence, libraries that house knowledge spanning millennia, and observatories where the dance of celestial bodies reveals secrets to those wise enough to interpret their movements. At its heart stands the sacred flame, eternal, unwavering, a beacon that has burned since time immemorial, fed not by wood or oil, but by the planet's own life stream. This flame represents more than mere illumination. It is the physical manifestation of the planet's soul, a conduit through which the consciousness of the world itself can be glimpsed and understood. Around this flame, generations of mystics, scholars, and seekers have gathered, drawn by an ancient calling to serve as guardians of wisdom in an age when such knowledge grows ever more precious and rare. Into this world of contemplation and cosmic awareness was born Nanaki, though his birth came at a time of growing shadow. The year of his arrival marked not celebration, but the beginning of sorrows that would reshape the very nature of his existence. For Nanaki was born into the twilight of his race, the last ember of a flame that had burned bright across the centuries. His people, the guardians of Cosmo Canyon, had dwindled through the inexorable passage of time, their numbers diminished by forces both natural and unnatural, until only a precious few remained to tend the sacred flame and preserve the ancient ways. His early years unfolded under the watchful guidance of Bugenhagen, the human elder whose devotion to the planet's mysteries had earned him a place of profound respect among the guardians. Bugenhagen was more than a teacher. He was a bridge between worlds, a mortal man who had transcended the limitations of his brief lifespan to commune with truths that belonged to the eternal. His floating sphere, that miraculous device that bore him aloft through the canyon's winding passages, was itself a testament to his deep understanding of the planet's forces, crafted through wisdom that merged ancient knowledge with an intuitive grasp of cosmic principles. Under Bugenhagen's tutelage, young Nanaki learned to read the movements of the stars, to feel the pulse of the life stream as it flowed through hidden channels beneath the earth, and to understand his place as inheritor of a legacy that stretched back to the dawn of consciousness itself. Yet with this knowledge came a burden that would shape every moment of his existence, the understanding that he was, perhaps, the last of his kind. The weight of this realization settled upon Nanaki's spirit like a shroud. To be the final guardian of an ancient tradition, to carry within oneself the accumulated wisdom of countless generations, knowing that when death finally claimed him, all of that knowledge would pass into silence forever. Such a burden would have crushed a lesser spirit. Yet Nanaki possessed something rare and precious, a resilience born not of denial, but of acceptance. He understood, even in youth, that his role was not to rage against the dying of the light, but to tend that light with such devotion that it might burn bright enough to illuminate the darkness that threatened to engulf the world. His days were spent in contemplation and study, learning to decipher the ancient texts that chronicled the planet's history, mastering the art of reading the life stream's flow, and developing the warrior skills that would serve him when the time came to venture beyond the canyon's protective embrace. For even in his youth, Nanaki sensed that his destiny lay not in quiet scholarly pursuits, but in the wider world where the planet's very survival hung in the balance. The canyon itself seemed to respond to his presence, as if recognizing in him the last true child of its ancient guardians. The flames burned brighter when he passed. The stones seemed to whisper secrets in languages older than human speech, and the very air thrummed with a resonance that spoke of deep connections between the young guardian and the place that had shaped his existence. He was not merely living in Cosmo Canyon, he was part of it, as integral to its being as the flame that burned at its heart. Yet, despite the profound spiritual connections that bound him to his ancestral home, Nanaki's youth was marked by an inner restlessness that he struggled to understand. There was something within him that yearned for action, for purpose beyond the contemplative life of study and meditation. This restlessness was not mere youthful impatience, but rather the stirring of a destiny that called him toward trials he could not yet imagine. His relationship with Bugenhagen during these formative years was complex and profound. The elderly scholar recognized in his young charge not just a student, but the living embodiment of hopes and fears that had haunted the canyon for generations. In Nanaki, Bugenhagen saw the possibility that the ancient wisdom might survive the approaching darkness, yet he also saw the terrible loneliness that would be Nanaki's constant companion throughout a life that might span centuries beyond the passing of all other living guardians. The training Nanaki received was unlike anything a human child might experience. Beyond the academic pursuits, the study of ancient languages, the memorization of star charts, the mastery of complex philosophical concepts, there was a deeper education taking place. Bugenhagen taught him to listen to the planet itself, to feel the subtle currents of the life stream as they responded to events, both great and small. He learned to sense disturbances in the natural order, to read the signs that indicated when the planet was in pain or distress. Most crucially, he learned about the nature of sacrifice and duty, the guardians of Cosmo Canyon had always understood that their role required them to place the planet's welfare above their own desires, to serve as protectors of a truth larger than any individual life or ambition. This understanding was woven into every lesson, every meditation, every moment of communion with the sacred flame. Nanaki was being prepared not just to be a scholar or mystic, but to be a guardian in the truest sense, one who would stand between the planet and those who would harm it, regardless of the personal cost. As the years passed and Nanaki grew from youth into the full strength of his maturity, the world beyond Cosmo Canyon began to change in ways that sent tremors through the planet's consciousness. The Shinra Electric Power Company had risen to dominance, its reactors drawing the life stream from the Earth with an efficiency that bordered on violence. What had once been a gentle symbiosis between civilization and the natural world was becoming a brutal extraction, a wounding of the planet that grew deeper with each passing day. Nanaki could feel these changes in ways that others could not. The sacred flame would flicker when new reactors came online. The ancient stones would vibrate with harmonics of pain and distress, and the very air of the canyon seemed to grow heavier with the weight of the planet's suffering. Through his connection to the life stream, he experienced each reactor as a wound in his own spirit, each extraction as a theft that diminished not just the planet, but all who were connected to its life force. Yet even as he felt these disturbances, Nanaki remained bound to Cosmo Canyon by duty and by the knowledge that his role as guardian required him to preserve the ancient flame and the wisdom it represented. He could not simply abandon his post to pursue those who were harming the planet, for if the canyon fell into darkness, a crucial beacon of hope would be extinguished forever. This tension between his desire for action and his obligation to remain as guardian created a profound internal struggle that would define much of his existence. It was during this period of growing darkness that fate intervened in the form of Professor Hojo, the twisted scientist whose experiments had already claimed so many innocent lives. Hojo's arrival at Cosmo Canyon was not driven by scholarly interest or spiritual seeking, but by his insatiable hunger for specimens that might further his grotesque research. In Nanaki, he saw not a being of wisdom and nobility, but merely another test subject whose unique physiology might yield interesting results. The capture itself was a violation that went beyond the physical. Hojo's methods stripped away not just freedom, but dignity, reducing a guardian of ancient wisdom to the status of a laboratory animal. The journey from the sacred canyon to the sterile halls of Shinra's research facilities represented more than a mere change of location. It was a passage from the realm of the sacred to the domain of the profane. From a world where life was revered to one where it was merely raw material for experimentation. Within Hojo's laboratory, Nanaki encountered horrors that tested every aspect of his training and philosophy. The scientist's experiments were designed not just to gather data, but to break the spirit of his subjects, to reduce them to compliance through a systematic destruction of hope and dignity. For a being who had been raised to see all life as sacred, who had spent his youth in communion with the planet's deepest truths, the laboratory represented the absolute negation of everything he had been taught to value and protect. Yet even in these darkest circumstances, Nanaki's training served him well. The meditative practices he had learned in Cosmo Canyon became tools for psychological survival, allowing him to retreat into inner spaces that Hojo could not reach or contaminate. The philosophical framework that Bugenhagen had so carefully constructed became a fortress of the spirit, providing stability and purpose even when the external world offered nothing but cruelty and degradation. More importantly, his time in captivity allowed him to observe the full extent of Shinra's corruption from within. He witnessed the casual disregard for life that permeated the company's operations, the way in which profit had become the only value that mattered, and the terrible efficiency with which the corporation was consuming the planet's life force. This knowledge, painful as it was to acquire, would prove crucial to his later understanding of the forces that threatened the world's survival. It was in Hojo's laboratory that Nanaki first encountered Cloud Strife and his companions, though their initial meeting was colored by the artificial nature of their circumstances. Here were beings who had also suffered at the hands of Shinra's machinery, who had their own reasons for opposing the corporation's destructive ambitions. Yet Nanaki's first impression of these potential allies was complicated by the bizarre nature of their first interaction. Forced into the role of breeding partner in one of Hojo's twisted experiments, he found himself thrust into a situation that violated every principle of dignity and consent that his upbringing had taught him to value. The rescue that followed was both liberation and revelation. As Cloud and his companions fought their way through Shinra's defenses, Nanaki saw in their actions something that resonated with his deepest convictions: a willingness to risk everything for the sake of others, a commitment to opposing injustice regardless of the personal cost. These were not the refined philosophical ideals he had studied in Cosmo Canyon's libraries, but their practical expression in a world where action mattered more than contemplation. His decision to join their cause was not made lightly. By leaving with Cloud's party, Nanaki was abandoning the security of his defined role as guardian of Cosmo Canyon and stepping into an uncertain future where his very survival was far from guaranteed. Yet he understood, with the clarity that comes from deep spiritual training, that the planet's crisis had reached a point where traditional forms of guardianship were no longer sufficient. The sacred flame would not be preserved by remaining safely in the canyon while the world burned around it. It would be protected by carrying its light into the darkness and using it to kindle hope in others. The journey that followed would test every aspect of Nanaki's character and training. As the party pursued Sephiroth across the planet's surface, Nanaki found himself serving multiple roles within the group. He was scholar and advisor, drawing upon his vast knowledge of the planet's history and the ancient texts to provide context for the crises they encountered. He was warrior and protector, his natural agility and strength proving invaluable in the countless battles that marked their path. Most importantly, he was the keeper of perspective, the one who could see their individual struggles as part of a larger pattern that encompassed the planet's entire history. His relationship with each member of the party developed in unique ways that reflected both his wisdom and his fundamental difference from human consciousness. With Cloud, he shared the bond of those who had suffered under Shinra's machinery. Yet he could also see past the ex-soldier's confused memories to the essential nobility that drove his actions. With Tifa, he recognized a strength that was both physical and spiritual, a determination to protect others that resonated with his own guardian instincts. Barrett's rage against Shinra's environmental destruction found an echo in Nanaki's own deep connection to the planet's pain, though the Guardian's response was tempered by centuries of philosophical training rather than immediate emotional reaction. Aerith represented perhaps the most complex relationship, for in her, Nanaki recognized another being, whose consciousness touched the planet's deeper currents. Their conversations, often conducted in quiet moments between battles, explored themes of destiny and sacrifice that would prove prophetic in ways neither could fully anticipate. Aerith's intuitive understanding of the planet's will complemented Nanaki's scholarly knowledge, creating a dialogue between mystical insight and academic wisdom that enriched both perspectives. Yet it was the return to Cosmo Canyon that would mark the most profound transformation in Nanaki's understanding of himself and his heritage. The homecoming he had anticipated with such longing became instead a journey into the deepest chambers of his own heart, where truths he had never imagined lay waiting to reshape his entire concept of honor, duty, and family. Bugenhagen's greeting was warm yet tinged with sadness, for the elderly scholar could see immediately how the trials of the outer world had changed his former student. The young guardian who had left the canyon bore little resemblance to the seasoned warrior who now returned, carrying within himself knowledge of horrors that no amount of theoretical study could have prepared him for. Yet Bugenhagen could also see that these trials had not broken Nanaki's spirit, but had instead refined it, burning away illusions and leaving behind a core of purpose that shone with its own inner light. The revelations that followed would shake the very foundations of Nanaki's identity. Throughout his youth, he had carried the burden of believing his father to be a coward, one who had fled when Cosmo Canyon faced its darkest hour. This belief had shaped his understanding of himself, creating a determination to prove that he would not repeat his father's failures, that he would stand firm regardless of the cost. It was a motivation born of shame and the desire for redemption, powerful but ultimately built upon a foundation of incomplete truth. Bugenhagen's gentle correction of this misunderstanding was both revelation and revolution. To learn that Sito had not fled in cowardice, but had instead made the ultimate sacrifice to protect his home and family, transformed not just Nanaki's understanding of the past, but his comprehension of his own nature and destiny. The courage he had spent his life trying to develop had been his birthright all along, inherited from a father whose love had been expressed through sacrifice rather than presence. The journey to the sealed cave, that tomb where Sito's petrified form still stood guard against ancient threats, became a pilgrimage of the deepest significance. Here, in the darkness beneath the canyon, Nanaki confronted the physical reality of his father's sacrifice. The stone warrior who had once been Sato still maintained his vigilant pose, weapon ready, face turned toward the depths where creatures of nightmare had once threatened to emerge and devastate the world above. The sight of his father's petrified form struck Nanaki with the force of revelation. This was not the monument to cowardice he had expected, but a testament to love expressed through ultimate sacrifice. Sato had not fled from danger, but had positioned himself as the final barrier between that danger and everything he held dear. His transformation to stone had not been a punishment for failure, but the price he had willingly paid to ensure that the threats contained within the cave could never again threaten Cosmo Canyon or its people. Standing before his father's remains, Nanaki felt the last barriers within his own heart crumble away. The shame that had driven him, the need to prove himself worthy of a heritage he had believed to be tainted by cowardice, dissolved in the face of this greater truth. He was not the son of a coward seeking redemption, but the heir to a legacy of sacrifice and protection that stretched back through generations of guardians who had placed duty above personal safety. The tears he shed in that sacred darkness were not merely for his father, but for all the years spent believing himself to be less than he truly was. They were tears of grief for the parent he had never known, but also tears of joy for the discovery that his deepest fears about his own nature were unfounded. The courage he had struggled to develop was revealed to be an inheritance as natural to him as breathing, a gift passed down through bloodline and example from a father whose love had transcended even death itself. Yet the revelation brought with it new understanding of the weight of his heritage. To be the son of such a father meant accepting responsibilities that went beyond personal honor or individual achievement. It meant recognizing that his life belonged not to himself alone, but to the continuing tradition of guardianship that Sato had died to preserve. This was not a burden to be resented, but a calling to be embraced with the full knowledge of what it might ultimately require. The return to the upper levels of the canyon marked not just the end of a pilgrimage, but the beginning of a new phase in Nanaki's development. His companions could see the change in him immediately, the way he carried himself, the new confidence that seemed to radiate from his very being, the sense of peace that had replaced the restless energy that had previously marked his demeanor. He had not simply learned a truth about his father. He had discovered a truth about himself that would inform every decision and action for the remainder of his life. Bugenhagen's satisfaction was evident as he observed the transformation in his former student. The elderly scholar had waited many years for this moment, knowing that Nanaki could not truly fulfill his destiny until he understood and accepted his heritage. Now, with that understanding achieved, the last of the canyon's guardians was ready to take his place in the larger struggle that would determine the planet's fate. The departure from Cosmo Canyon that followed was entirely different from Nanaki's previous leaving, where before he had fled into uncertainty, driven by circumstances beyond his control. Now he chose his path with full knowledge of its implications. He was no longer a refugee from his responsibilities, but a guardian venturing forth to fulfill them on a stage larger than the canyon itself. The sacred flame he carried within himself was no longer a burden to be preserved in isolation, but a light to be shared with a world that desperately needed its illumination. The battles that followed tested every aspect of Nanaki's transformed understanding. As the party pursued Sephiroth across the planet's surface, encountering wonders and horrors in equal measure, Nanaki found himself drawing upon reserves of strength and wisdom he had not known he possessed. The revelation of his father's true nature had unlocked something fundamental within him, allowing him to access not just his own potential, but the accumulated wisdom and courage of all the guardians who had come before him. His role within the party evolved as well, shifting from that of knowledgeable companion to something approaching spiritual guide. The others began to turn to him, not just for information about the planet's history or the nature of the forces they were fighting, but for the kind of perspective that comes only from deep philosophical training, combined with personal transformation. His words carried weight because they emerged from a foundation of tested truth rather than mere academic knowledge. The final confrontations with Sephiroth and the revelation of the planet's true crisis found Nanaki prepared in ways that his younger self could never have imagined. When the party discovered the full extent of the threat, not just Sephiroth's individual madness, but the cosmic implications of Meteor's approach and the planet's desperate attempt to defend itself through the weapons, Nanaki's deep connection to the planet's consciousness allowed him to comprehend the stakes with a clarity that guided the entire group's understanding. His participation in the final battle was informed by all of these revelations and transformations. He fought not as an individual seeking personal victory or revenge, but as the conscious representative of forces that transcended any single lifetime or ambition. Every attack, every strategic decision, every moment of courage under fire was an expression of the guardian tradition that had shaped him and the planetary consciousness that he served. The victory that followed was both ending and beginning. With Sephiroth's defeat and Meteor's destruction, the immediate crisis was resolved, but Nanaki understood better than most that such victories are never final. The planet's well-being requires constant vigilance, and the forces that had nearly destroyed it would inevitably arise in new forms that would require new responses from those dedicated to its protection. The epilogue that concluded their journey showed Nanaki in his true element, not as a warrior forced into battle by circumstances, but as the guardian he had always been destined to become. The sight of him leading his offspring through the overgrown ruins of what had once been Midgar spoke to themes of renewal and continuity that resonated with the deepest truths he had learned. Life persists, wisdom endures, and the Guardian's vigil continues across generations, adapting to new challenges while maintaining fidelity to eternal principles. His legacy extends far beyond the specific events of the struggle against Sephiroth. In a world where the connection between consciousness and the planet's life force had been nearly severed by technological excess and spiritual neglect, Nanaki represented the possibility of restoration. His very existence proved that the ancient wisdom had not been lost, that there remained those who could bridge the gap between the sacred and the mundane, between the eternal truths and the immediate necessities of survival. The children he would raise and train would carry forward not just his genetic heritage, but the philosophical and spiritual traditions that he embodied. Through them, the guardian tradition would continue, adapting to whatever new challenges the future might bring, while maintaining its core commitment to protecting the planet and all its inhabitants. The sacred flame that had burned in Cosmo Canyon for millennia would continue to burn, not just in its ancient temple, but in the hearts and minds of new generations who would carry its light into whatever darkness might threaten the world. Perhaps most significantly, Nanaki's story represents the triumph of wisdom over despair, of connection over isolation, of hope over the seemingly inevitable decline that marks so many tales of last survivors. Rather than allowing the weight of being the final guardian to crush his spirit, he transformed that burden into a source of strength that enriched not just his own life, but the lives of all those whose paths intersected with his own. His relationship with the planet itself evolved throughout his journey from a theoretical understanding based on study and meditation to a lived reality forged through trial and revelation. By the end, he was not simply someone who knew about the planet's consciousness. He was an active participant in it, a point of focused awareness through which the planet could perceive and respond to threats and opportunities that might otherwise go unrecognized. The philosophical implications of Nanaki's story extend beyond the specific context of the Final Fantasy VII narrative to touch on universal themes of purpose, heritage, and responsibility. His journey from shame to pride, from isolation to connection, from theoretical knowledge to lived wisdom, speaks to the fundamental human experience of discovering one's true nature and learning to live in accordance with it. In the end, Red XIII, Nanaki, son of Seto, last guardian of Cosmo Canyon, keeper of the sacred flame, stands as a testament to the enduring power of wisdom, courage, and compassion in a world that often seems designed to extinguish such qualities. His story reminds us that even when we believe ourselves to be alone, we are part of a larger tradition that extends both backward into history and forward into possibility. The light we carry within ourselves is not ours alone, but belongs to the eternal flame that connects all consciousness, all life, all hope for a future where wisdom and compassion might yet prevail over ignorance and cruelty. The sacred flame burns on, tended by faithful guardians, illuminating the darkness with its steady light, offering hope to all who seek truth in a world of shadows. And in that continuity, in that endless vigilance, in that commitment to something greater than individual existence, lies the true meaning of Nanaki's legend, not as a story of endings, but as a promise of beginnings yet to come. And so, traveler, the tale draws to its end. However, the planet still whispers, and many legends remain yet untold. May the memory of what you've heard tonight stay with you on your journey. Before you depart, add your thoughts to the journal. Share what this adventure stirred within you, what paths it reminded you of, or what questions now linger in your mind. In this way, your reflections become part of the story itself. Return when the fire is lit again, and together we shall remember more of what has been. Until then, safe travels, wherever the life stream may guide you.